Well, for any set of facts, there's going to be multiple hypotheses that you can abduct to, right?
That wasn't an answer to my question, Vic.
So how are you going to distinguish between the different hypotheses?
By looking at their explanatory virtues, Vic.
But those are either going to be some kind of like conceptual entailments, right? About making less assumptions, which obviously, if you make less assumptions,
Yeah, or their
then that's
explanatory power or their
right.
explanatory scope.
Yeah, but all of those are going to rest on making less assumptions.
Or degree of ad hocness. So can I support belief in theism with abductive reasoning? And you said no earlier, by the way.
If theistic hypotheses are unfalsifiable, then yeah.
Okay, so theism is irrational even with abductive evidence?
Well, when you abduct to a hypothesis, presumably that hypothesis is going to be more likely to be true given those facts that you're doing abductive reasoning from. And that's going to mean that the hypothesis has to be falsifiable.
No, it would just mean that Vic, it would
Yeah,
just
that
mean that
does-
the premises were falsifiable. It doesn't have to mean the conclusion is, right? I can have abductive support for premises in an argument.
No, right. But the way you get from the premises to the conclusions is either going to be some like conceptual entailment, or it's going to be that the premises raise the probability of that hypothesis that you abducted to.
That's abductive reason. That's just what abductive reasoning is.
Okay, so then it's either going to be some kind of conceptual entailment, or it's going to be that you're applying the falsification criterion.
No, it could just be abductive reasoning.
But that's just like, this is a string of words. I don't know what you mean by that anymore.
It could just be me looking at explanatory power, explanatory scope, degree of ad hocness, plausibility,
You
coherence,
already went over
belief. Okay, so is it rational if I have that kind of support for theism?
Well, I mean, I already told you about all the explanatory virtues, right? Like
no, I just want a direct answer.
I don't know what you want an answer to.
It's just a yes or no. Is theism rational given abductive evidence?
Well, are you asking me if I think there are any good theistic
hypotheses? I'm asking, no, I'm not saying that. I'm asking, hypothetically speaking, supposing I had abductive evidence for theism, would that render theism rational?
Not if it's unfalsifiable. You can't.
Okay, how does that not apply to the multiverse and Abraham Lincoln?
If they're unfalsifiable, then it does. If they're not.
Okay, so you think belief in Abraham Lincoln is irrational?
If it's unfalsifiable.
Do you think it's falsifiable?
I don't have an opinion on that.
So that's a dodge. So this is where we got to.
It just seems irrelevant.
It's not irrelevant at all. It's a reductio on your view.
I mean, what you're saying is how theoretical physicists practice physics is irrational now. Because they practice exactly how inseparable line does. They rely upon cognitive virtues as opposed to falsification.
But those cognitive virtues, right, like explanatory scope, explanatory power, they're all going to rest on a priori constraints, right? Like if something has more explanatory power, then you need less assumptions to explain more facts. So obviously, that's going to be more likely to be true than if you're making more assumptions to explain the same amount of facts, right? Because what that's just going to be is more assumptions that could go wrong.
Yeah, but that's not really relevant to his point. His point is if you have an abductive case for theism, even if it's unfalsifiable, it's just irrational. And even if you have those a priori constraints, it still makes it rational. That's what his point is.
So how can you make an abductive inference to a hypothesis if that hypothesis is actually compatible with all possible observations?
By looking at its explanatory
virtues. When you abduct from the set of observations, presumably that set of observations has to raise the probability of that hypothesis, right? Like the Abraham Lincoln hypothesis. Presumably, given Abraham Lincoln's existence, it's more likely that we have, texts made by texts that, have his name on them.
Yeah, that's just what explanatory power means.
Yeah, but that's going to be because the Abraham Lincoln hypothesis is compatible with some observations and incompatible with others.
No, it isn't. Abraham Lincoln could have existed and all of the evidence could have decayed over time.
Well, that's just going to be like some other ad hoc hypothesis.
Okay, so would no, Vic, you're missing the point.
Yeah,
Your argument about theism rules out belief in historical. It rules out our historical beliefs and rules out beliefs in high level things in physics like the multiverse.
Well, I'm not really convinced of that, but even if it did, I don't see that that's a way around the argument.
You haven't made an argument, Vic. You just made a series of assertions.
No, well, did you disagree that if a hypothesis is compatible with all logically possible observations, then there's no observation that raises the probability that it's true?
Yeah, in terms of observations, but you don't just use observations when you're getting a justification for a theory. You also look at its explanatory virtues, which is what physicists
We
actually
went
do.
over that
wait,
too.
wait. This is really easy to solve. So let's say we have a set of theories that are all unfalsifiable, and they are all empirically equivalent. How do we decide which one of them to go by, or how do scientists decide
They
which one to go by?
they'd reduce to the same theory.
No,
that's not true.
no, they wouldn't. They would say which has the most explanatory virtue.
Yeah, they would
Okay,
look at
but then,
cognitive virtues such as simplicity, explanatory
well,
scope, compatibility with background theories and
yeah, but
other cognitive virtues.
all of that is going to reduce to something like making more assumptions, right? Or making less assumptions, which is going to be the conceptual thing that I said earlier.
No, it isn't just making less.
No, they could be fundamentally different assumptions, but they're still all empirically equivalent.
I don't understand what that means. If
I mean,
they
there's a good
predict
paper.
all of the same if they predict all of the same facts in all possible worlds, then how would they be different empirical theories?
What do you mean by all possible worlds?
That just means that there's no possible observation that would rule out one that would be in favor of one, and that would raise the
I'm not,
probability of one, but not.
we're not talking about possible observation. We're talking about the observation that's already been made. If we have a set of theories that are all empirically equivalent, and all of them are unfalsifiable, how do we decide which one to go by?
Well, yeah, I
They're not
mean,
reducible to one or the other.
okay, well, if they don't make the same predictions in all possible worlds, then they would be different theories, and then
If
explanatory.
they made prediction, they wouldn't be unfalsifiable to begin with.
So okay, well then if they're unfalsifiable, then no observation could raise the probability of their truth.
Yeah, so that I mean, now you're just repeating my question. I asked how do physicists decide which theory to go by? They're unfalsifiable and they're empirically equivalent.
So they predict all of the same observations in all
They
possible
don't
worlds.
predict
In other
anything.
words,
They're unfalsifiable.
right, so they're compatible with all the same observations, like theory
Yes.
A and theory B are all
Yeah, they're
completely.
unfalsifiable. They don't make any predictions.
Yeah, they would just be the same theory then.
No, they wouldn't.
No.
Well, I don't know what you're appealing to say that there's a difference.
This is when they appeal to cognitive virtues like explanatory scope, explanatory power, accuracy, simplicity.
But I don't think you're understanding what those virtues are.
What do you mean?
Well, like the point with making more assumptions or less assumptions is that there's more things that could go wrong, right? If you're making more assumptions. But in order to say that there's more things that could go wrong, you have to appeal to like a set of observations that would be consistent or inconsistent with the theory, right?
Explanatory virtues are not the same,
Yeah,
and not all just assumption, and not all just degree of assumptions.
it
How
seems
many
like
assumptions there are in a theory is one explanatory virtue. That's degree of ad-hocness.
Another way to make that point would just be to add it on to what Venus has said. So Venus equalized what the falsifiability of the theories and one other factor. What was the other factor?
Empirical equivalence.
Yeah, so empirical evidence was equal, falsifiability was equal, and then we're reduced to choosing the theory based on explanatory virtue. Now, the problem with saying that all of the explanatory virtue... Wait, 1 second. Just let me get the point across before I forget it. The problem with saying that all of the explanatory virtue reduces down to simplicity is that you could add simplicity to the things that Vic is equalizing there. So you could equalize falsifiability, simplicity, and empirical prediction, or whatever the other one is, and there would still presumably be some basis to choose between theories at that point.
But
It
what
seems
I'm
like
saying is that if they make all of the same predictions, right? If they're unfalsifiable and then they both make all of the same predictions, right? They make no predictions, then they're just going to be isomorphic theory.
Yeah, no, they aren't. Vic. No, they aren't. That's not how it works. There are many beliefs in like think about our historical beliefs, right? Let's take it out of science, perhaps. Our historical beliefs might all just be empirically equivalent and unfalsifiable.
I think I know why I see Vic's confusion. What he's thinking about explanatory, as in the way Popper explained it, that the more explanatory power a theory has, the more it prohibits. And so, if two theories have equal explanatory power, they prohibit just as much. But the thing is, they could prohibit different things, and so be equal in explanatory power and still prohibit different things. And so
Wait,
they won't
but if they
reduce to the
prohibit
same
different
theory.
things, those are going to be, they're going to actually make predictions, right? So
If
they,
they prohibit different things, no, they could still prohibit different things that are not observable to humans,
I don't know what that means.
which is what multiverse theories do. They prohibit different things that you could never observe.
That it's impossible to observe?
Yes.
Right, so then they'd be compatible with all logically possible observations, so they wouldn't prohibit anything.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you choose between them? That's the very question. They don't make any predictions. They are empirically equivalent. They're
You
mutually
can roll a
exclusive.
dice or flip a coin.
Yeah, that's not how physicists do it. Now you should read a paper by Sean Callis called Beyond Falsifiability, Normal Science in the Multiverse. It goes through the process of how they select in scenarios like the one I posited. They rely on things that Insup&Venus line explained, like how they cohere with our other background theories, their scope,
But
their
but to
explanatory
say
powers,
but
mathematical simplicity, and other matters.
to say they cohere with our background theories is just saying that they don't make more assumptions than necessary.
No, it isn't.
So if they're not making more assumptions, right, because they cohere with our background theories, that just means that there's less assumptions that could go wrong. Right. So
They
that
might
that's
make
the reason
they might make
why
just as many
it's
assumptions,
probable to
but they
be true.
might be assumptions about different things, right? So that would just be equal. And then how do you decide?
The idea is that if we have two multiverse theories and one is coherent with general theory of relativity and the other seems to be in conflict with it, we're going to prefer the one that is compatible with it just because it's
But I
compatible
don't
with it.
know but I don't know what you mean by it's compatible or incompatible with it if it doesn't predict any different observations, right? If they all predict the same observations, how are they
But they don't
incompatible?
predict anything. Like I don't get it. Like we've said like 10 times now that they're
Well,
unfalsifiable.
no, yeah. If they predict all of the same logically possible observations, then of course, yeah, they don't predict anything. But that still means that they make the same predictions, right? Even if they don't predict anything.
How do they make any the same prediction if they don't make any
What they
predictions?
don't make any different predictions. Is what I mean.
No, they don't make any prediction whatsoever. They're unfalsifiable.
Yeah, so that doesn't matter though.
Of course it matters. You're saying that they're making the same prediction when they're not
So
making
I
any
can
prediction.
say, look, I can say that supervenience physicalism is still true under eliminative materialism, right? So the mind would still supervene on the physical if there is no mind at all, right? So it's not factive to say that the mind supervenes on the physical. It doesn't mean that there is a mind.
Okay, I mean, going back to what you said about predictions, right? If they don't make any prediction, then they're unfalsifiable. Are we agreeing on that?
Yeah,
So they're not falsifiable, right? They're empirically equivalent, meaning they're equally compatible with the set of data we've already observed.
yeah. Then they'd be
One of them is compatible with general theory of relativity. The other isn't. Which one do we go with?
I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know at this point.
If
I mean,
it's incompatible with it, then that means it predicts different observations. But if it doesn't predict any observations, then it can't be incompatible.
I actually think I can kind of see what Vic is saying there. Because I get the point about you'd be able to say this theory coheres with some other theory we have, and that's, you know, support for this theory over another if the other theory doesn't cohere with you know, some other theory we have. But when the theory you're looking for coherence with, if it were the case that all that theory was a bunch of empirical statements, then it wouldn't make sense how you're saying that there could be any coherence between it and something that doesn't make any empirical statements. So it might just be that, like, if gravity were that kind of thing, which I don't know if it is, I'm not a physicist, that you just have to pick some other kind of theory that's just not dealing so strictly with, like, I don't know, like material stuff out there in the world, and say that, you know, when we're choosing between theories, coherence with some other theory we have that's not gravity, but that's about more like immaterial things would probably work. Do you get what I'm saying there?
No, I don't understand at all. I think this is
yeah, I don't
Okay, well,
follow
let me
really.
I could ask it like a question. Like, does gravity does the theory of gravity do more than make empirical claims?
no, it's pretty far as it's just empirical.
Okay, because there's just I could see something in Vic's favor, right? If we're trying to we're looking at a theory that doesn't make predictions. We're trying to choose between two theories that don't make predictions, that are empirically equivalent, that are equivalently simple. And we're looking at explanatory virtues, and then we look at the explanatory virtue of cohering with other theories we have. Now, there could be like incoherence about saying that it's possible for some theory that doesn't make predictions to cohere with another theory if all that other theory did was make predictions. So there might be a problem with using something like gravity as the example, unless gravity does something else than, you know, like make predictions.
I mean, compatibility doesn't always have to empirical. It could be mathematical in nature. I mean, the idea is that once two theories are unfalsifiable and empirically equivalent, we look at other factors such as their scope of their explanation, and if that's equivalent, we look at whether or not they cohere with background belief. So if one is completely compatible with the general theory of relativity, whereas a second one says a
But hold
constant gotta
on.
change or something's gotta change for this theory to work, we'll just go with the one that coheres with it instead of changing, our background's beliefs. That's the entire idea.
So
And
this,
that's what Inseparable was getting at as well,
but
with
wait,
the
Yeah.
abductive
so
evidence.
the scope thing, right? The scope of explanation, that's just going to be that it predicts more facts than the other theory, right? That's what the scope means.
Just to be clear, I agree with you guys. I think Vic is wrong, but I was just making a point because I could see something about what he was saying there. Like, I think it's obviously the case that there's still some basis for choosing, and we're going to look to explanatory virtues. And I don't think all those explanatory virtues are going to just reduce to the simplicity of the theory. So no, I'm completely on your page. I was just
I
making a
didn't
point
say
Yeah, no,
about.
scope doesn't mean it predicts more. One, if we have two theories, it could be that one explains why the CMB has the values that it has now, whereas the other doesn't say anything, and one would have
I know
more
what the
scope
CMB.
than the other
Well, I
without
didn't.
it.
I didn't say anything about scope. Like, I was just
No,
acknowledging.
that's what I said. So
Cosmic
I was
microwave
saying, right,
background.
that the scope of the hypothesis, right, the explanatory scope of the hypothesis just means that like it ties together more facts than the other hypothesis.
Yeah, but
That's what it
that's
means.
not a prediction. You said that predicts more.
Yeah, that
Well,
isn't
by
what we mean by
prediction, I
prediction,
mean,
Vic. That's just the
what I
evidence
mean,
that we
just
have.
that it
If
it
it can,
rules
if it
out.
explains, no. It's not that
So
it
it doesn't have to
rules
be
out.
like it doesn't have to be ex ante prediction, right? You could the Abraham Lincoln hypothesis could predict some facts that we already know, for example, right? because it could be more likely, given the Abraham theory, the Abraham Lincoln hypothesis, that these facts obtain.
Yeah, I just don't get what you're trying to say here, Vic.
I think he's talking about retrodiction.
I mean, the evidence, the specific evidence that we have for the multiverse theory isn't a unique prediction, right? That's just the evidence that we have. That isn't a prediction. A prediction is something further that you make that was
Right.
outside of your evidence. And
Yeah,
we were
yeah.
discussing
I
theories
get
that were empirically equivalent and
That
unfalsifiable.
that's
So it
just
just
the difference between like predicting a novel fact and just making predictions implicative.
yeah. Well,
Well,
if it was if you could say that predictions didn't
It
have to
makes
be novel, then every theory would make good predictions because every theory would have whatever evidence you could appeal to, right? And then you'd say, oh, here's my predictions, the evidence that I have in the very first.
Right, but in order for it to be evidence, it would actually have to rule out other observations. Right, it would have to be more likely given those facts, and for it to be more likely given those facts, it couldn't be compatible with
It doesn't need
all
to
logical
it doesn't need to rule out other explanations at all.
yeah,
Because
then
there are
you're saying it's
empirically equivalent theories.
falsifiable. Yeah, you're just saying it's falsifiable in different
Yeah,
terms.
exactly.
The very point is it doesn't have to be falsifiable in order for it to be justified. I think that was Unsurpable's thesis in this discussion.
Well, I didn't say anything about it have to be falsified or for it to be justified. Like it could be conceptually necessary or something.
Yeah, well, when we're talking about empirical theories, they're not conceptual necessity.
Right, okay, well then if it's a theory that's empirical, then it's falsifiable.
Except there are theories that people work with today, like the multiverse, which are not falsifiable.
Well, if that's true, then I mean the argument's gonna apply to that. I don't think
Yeah, I mean, if you want to bite the bullet that theoretical physics is bullshit, then go right ahead. I think that's what Insuperable is trying to get you to do, right?
Well, I don't know anything about theoretical physics, so I
And the
don't
dodge.
really care about that. But if it still doesn't like get around the conceptual argument, right? Just because people have been practicing this kind of stuff.
The whole, I mean, the idea of why the demarcation problem failed if you let Lau down was because every notion of demarcation failed to sort of capture how science is actually practiced, right? So the idea is you want to have a demarcation that captures how scientists actually practice science. But if you're saying that I'm going to stick with, Popper's demarcation of falsification, then you can just bite the bullet on, the multiverse and just say that that's, unscientific. And then Inseparable is going to declare victory on that. If not, then you can take his position and rely on other cognitive virtues like coherence with background, the explanatory scope, and these other cog virtues that scientists work with today.
I didn't understand what you just said.
I said if you want to stick with falsification as the demarcation, then you can bite the bullet on the multiverse being unscientific, and Inseparable is going to declare victory. If you don't want to do that, then you should probably adopt his position and rely on cognitive virtues and therefore rely on inductive reasoning or theory
Well,
choosing.
if they, I mean, if physicists think that they're making unfalsifiable hypotheses, then I mean, I doubt that they would agree with that. That seems like
Okay, so if it is physics bullshit? And this is going to be worse than physics as well. This is going to lead to our beliefs about the past being irrational.
No, I think those beliefs make predictions.
No, they don't. There might be the evidence might degrade. There might just be no evidence that's recorded.
Well, if you say all of that, then that just makes it unfalsifiable.
Yeah, and that would be the case with all beliefs about the past.
That's only if you construe them such that they're unfalsifiable. But you
Well,
don't have to.
it's not about my construal. There just is no way to falsify the past. The past is gone. You can't falsify it. That's obvious.
No, that doesn't follow, right? People posit causal relations between the past and the future. I mean, you have to, right? That's what
That's just
causation
an
is.
assumption,
What are you talking about?
and that isn't falsifiable either. So,
I mean, they
so
are
I don't think that's an empirical claim.
just to interject inseparable line. You obviously reduced Vic to absurdity when it came to science, but when you're making the argument for history, history considered to be science to begin with. So his falsification principle works pretty fine there. You can just say history isn't science, so it's not
but then what's
falsifiable.
history?
Is
I mean,
history
historians use the same criterions that scientists do. They use explanatory virtues. That's how history is practiced.
Yeah, you're right. They do rely on Bayes' Bayes' probability, but I don't think history is considered to be science.
Well, my understanding was that they actually don't use Bayes because you can't. It's difficult to assign specific numbers, like actual numbered probabilities for events.
I've seen some do some things like the resurrection of Christ and some other things.
Yeah, but most of them will use explanatory virtues.
Yeah, sure. The point is that some do use similar things that we were talking about in regards to the multiverse, right?
Yeah, they'll use that. They'll appeal to explanatory virtues, like the way that William Lane Craig is going to argue for the resurrection. It's by appealing to its explanatory virtue. Now, the thing is that if abductive reasoning is bullshit, then that is going to rule out our historical beliefs. Right? I don't believe in Abraham Lincoln because of Bayes' theorem.
I know.
And it's not conceptually necessary either.
So, Venus,
So,
what was the thing about reducing to absurdity? I didn't understand that.
Oh no, I mean, like, if you stick to your standards, then the multiverse is gonna be unscientific and just pseudoscience.
probably
Just seems
quarks as
absurd.
well and electrons.
But even
I
if that was
mean,
true, why would that
and
be absurd?
and inflation theory as well would be nonsense.
Even if all of that was true, why would it be absurd?
I don't know. I'm just saying that the best theories in physics today are all
Well, wait, but calling them
pseudoscientific.
the best theories just seems question begging.
Or the best considered theories by physicists.
Yeah, just the way that actual physics works IRL, right? So if your little if your conception of the way that physics works just doesn't line up with reality, then it's just absurd.
Yeah,
I don't understand that.
yeah, guys, the way physicists practice physics is wrong. They're all pseudoscientific quirks.
Well, it's all a meme, so.
But yeah, no, anyways, inseparable. Just back to you. Do you think that it's impossible to do some kind of a probability calculation on past historical events?
Well, yeah, because you can't really assign a 0.75% probability to a historical event, right? You can only give credences. You can just use your intuitions.
Someone like Craig does it is just pulling things out of his ass.
No. When Craig is using Bayes' theorem, he's doing that to respond to atheists who are using David Hume's argument against the rationality of believing in a miracle. He doesn't actually use that to establish the resurrection. He's just doing that as a part of a response, as a part of a counter argument.
Yeah, gotcha.
So there are theists who do use Bayes' theorem, like Richard Swinburne, for instance. I think he comes to the conclusion that the resurrection happened with a 97% probability, but he's in the minority. And actually, William Lane Craig has said that he disagrees with that idea because he said something like he just laughs because he doesn't see how you can assign specific probabilities in terms of like a number to a historical event. I mean, the way that historians do history is by using explanatory virtues. Okay, and historical theories are not falsifiable because the past is gone. You can't visit the 1850s and have a look at what happened in the 1850s. You just got to use what is virtuous with our evidence. That's it.
So Swinburne is the only one amongst the TS camp who actually uses this, and Craig says that's laughable.
Yeah, well, I don't know if Swinburne is the only one, but he's the one that I'm aware of. But as far as I'm aware, most of the theists who are going to be arguing for the resurrection are using explanatory virtues, and
Gotcha.
just historians arguing for just normal history are going to be using explanatory virtues as well.
Gotcha. And if an atheist like Vic rejects that, then you just reduce him to the absurdity that he's going to declare physics to be pseudoscience.
Yeah, and history is bullshit too.
Oh, that's a nice strategy.
Yeah, I don't really understand it.
Vic, it's Vic. Do you? I don't even know where to go here, Vic. You just believe in like crazy scientism, apparently, from the 50s that nobody else accepts anymore.
From the 20s, actually.
It doesn't seem like there's an alternative to what I'm saying.
What about everything that we've been saying?
Well, I've already responded to it. I don't know what you want.
Okay, I think we've finished this debate. All right. Well, it was nice talking to you guys. Good conversation.
Yeah, take care, buddy. Yo, Isaac, how you been, buddy?
I've been good, but if the debate's over, I'm definitely going to.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask you to play Apex, but
No, I don't. All right, have a good one, Venus. Bye-bye,
yeah,
Vic.
good night. Is Holly always dead at this time?
Holy's just dead in general.
Yeah.
Mm.
I don't know. It is usually dead at this time. We're mostly American. Like
Yo,
save like May, everyone else on the mod team is American.
Did
Yeah,
Malpass ever reply to the whole logic thingy?
I don't know. I guess Isaac is the one with like a direct link to him. I don't think he would respond to my DMs.
Are you still agnostic on the thingy?
No, I think he'll lean back in the direction of like where I originally was, which is that it's valid. Actually, Vic, while you're here, do you have an opinion on this?
On what?
Do you have the argument on hand, Venus, or can you type it out?
Oh yeah, we said that this is valid. 1 second. Fuck, I have American keyboard on a non-American. There we go. Would you say that this is a valid? Would you say this is a valid argument or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
That's just what's it
Yeah,
called?
it's as
Curry's
obvious
paradox.
as 2 plus 2 equals 4. Yeah, it's just that brain was
Curry.
unsure.
Wait, there's a name for it, Vic?
Yeah, Curry's paradox. Because you can assume P, right? Which is just P equals Q, and then you can use the same. You can just repeat the first premise, right? So you could make it the second premise, and then P entails P. Premise 2, P entails P. You can swap P entails P for P. You have modus ponens. Now you just prove the first premise, right? So you prove P entails P, and then you can just run that again to show that Q. Sorry, that P entails Q, and then you can just run it again to show that Q. So yeah, it's valid. But I guess there's like substructural logics and other type
Yeah,
of
no,
logic.
you missed the point of it, Vic. The entire idea is that just that the antecedent is an axiom of first order logic, so it becomes redundant to put it in MP form.
Well, I'm just showing like a way to prove it.
You think Curry's paradox actually provides a proof?
A proof of what?
The argument being valid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. If the curry is true, then 1 equals 3.
Right. Because any if A then B will just derive any B. That doesn't seem like a very useful thing to do, though.
If you're a logician, it is.
Couldn't you just prove that it's also not valid? Or would that be
You could prove anything.
right?
Yeah, entirely right.
I guess
I mean,
that just leads you to explosion pretty quickly, just by definition.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem with like there are a bunch of paradoxes like that, right? Like the liars, the curry, the
Right. What's your proposed resolution to the paradox?
I think Tarski had it right.
It's interesting because that would mean that even like paraconsistent logics still explode.
Yeah.
In like virtue, basically.
No, I like to hold to classical logic, and I take Tarski's response to all these paradoxes. And then with like Sorites, I just take the epistemicist response.
Okay.
So yeah, I have a bunch of crazy views, but I don't think that's a problem. I think all people can do is like say it's absurd, like what Venus tried to do.
the idea, I mean, I don't know, I mean, like, when it
Yeah,
comes to
like-
absurdity, that is not logical contradiction, right? I mean, it just comes
Yeah.
down to what your intuition says.
Well, no, I just don't think there's an alternative to it. Like I think what you guys were saying was just incoherent.
I just find it like intuitively absurd to say like, the way physics
It sounds
practices
weird
results to
coming
do
from them.
scientific. Am I audible?
It sounds weird you talking about someone being absurd. Like, since
Yeah, I don't.
you're like disagree with saying that, like, you know, someone's position is absurd, like when vegans say it.
No, I mean like if he doesn't have a problem saying theoretical physics today is also the science, I mean he could bite the bullet on that.
Well, it doesn't seem like a
The
bullet.
other guy is just gonna declare victory there and then, and the debate will have ended there.
What's your response to the Moore's paradox?
Which one is that?
Sorry, which one is that?
Yeah.
I know it is raining outside, but I do not believe it.
I don't know what that means.
How about Newcomb's paradox?
You $1.
Gotcha. That was the first time you and I talked, actually, about that paradox.
What's Morris?
1 second, I'll just link it.
What happened to the debate chat?
Doctor.
It's Lexington Peterson.
So it's just a proposed failing of sentences that have first person present tense in them. For example, the sentence, "I know it is raining outside, but I don't believe that it is raining outside," seems to make sense linguistically, but doesn't seem to make sense logically.
Mm.
That fucking.
Because it seems like the propositional content there can in fact be true.
Well, I
and
think a
that
lot
it's
of
not
things,
inconsistent, and that there's no like obvious contradiction there, although there appears to be just something linguistically weird.
so I think a lot of things are like that, right? Like I can say this sentence is meaningful, for example.
Bryn, did you see this in general chat?
Wait, do you have problems with like self-referentials?
Mm. Well, yeah, I take Tarski's view. So,
I don't know what Tarski's view is. I'd have to go read it.
well, in order to refer to a language, you have to use a meta language to refer to an object language. So you can't self-refer. It's just
Gotcha. Karl Popper agrees with him.
Is it like the paradox there or something?
where.
Well, no, I was just Vic was saying that he has a lot of whack views to paradoxes. I wanted to see if his view had changed on Newcomb's problem, because when I was very naive to philosophy, I held the view that there wasn't a solution to it, and Vic thinks that there is a solution to it. And then Moore's paradox is one I like to hear people who have a lot of thoughts on semantics speak about, because like JHC can ramble about it for hours, and I know I've heard Jack talk about it for hours or for a while as well. I was just interested if Vic had a interesting take on it.
What was
Moore's
the other guy
paradox.
said before? The guy before Jack? What the fuck is that?
He's not around anymore. Don't worry about it.
I think it
Right.
just expresses a contradiction.
Right. Yeah. JHC held the view that just when we're using like language like that, all we're just doing is like an intuitionist logic where belief would just be its own operator, and so there's nothing wrong with it. And we just need we just need like a formal like logical language that expresses the belief operator, and that would solve it just fine.
Does that mean you need
But
language
that would be counter to our views about beliefs and knowledge, right? Because we just take it to be the case that knowledge is a type of belief. Presumably, that would be constitutive of our belief towards the rain.
Isn't that literally the main view of knowledge? That is a subset of belief?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see.
Except for apparently God's knowledge. God's knowledge is not a belief.
Like
Right.
knowledge
If
of
you would,
qualia.
if
I
you
was
had,
just about to ask, does that mean that we need like a type of language that describes the actual objective nature of what is going on in your mind? Is that what you're saying?
I'm gonna go shower.
Go sleep.
I actually have to leave my house in like half an hour.
I'm gonna ban you.
I gotta leave my house and I'm not going back for like 12 hours.
Wait,
When I get home, when I get home, I'm gonna crash because I'm fucking tired.
the fuck did you?
I was out partying all night too. So
What the hell?
I'm really having a hard time, to be honest.
What the fuck?
It's okay, don't worry about me.
Good luck.
I would have gone to bed, but I really wanted to see if they could argue for pragmatism.
For pragmatism, I'm not a pragmatist.
yeah, pragmatist. I don't know, man.
What are you, Vic?
Well, a person.
God.
Mm-hmm. That's what I thought. Oh, Vic is God a person?
Yeah.
How do we define a person?
He's a
person is anything
possible
because
worlds.
God.
Well, Vic thinks that non-human animals are persons.
Well, he would be objectively wrong as stated by the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a problem then.
And you gotta go to the.
God ordained this bitch.
Was the other dude?
How would we know that God ordained it?
Oh, I keep getting cut off.
It's
God
unfalsifiable, so you
through
can't.
special revelation.
There can't be evidence for it.
It's happening right now.
Why would that matter, Vic?
That it's unfalsifiable, or that there can't be evidence for it.
Mhm.
Which one?
Just like both, probably.
Yeah.
Well, it
Not
matters
gonna-
if you think it's if you think there's evidence for it.
Yeah, I guess I just wouldn't be like an evidentialist Christian anymore. I would just drop that component.
Yeah, you can be like.
I would just become like a presuppositional, right? I just make like a priori arguments for it.
Well, I think most people think there's like a good ontological argument, or
Right, I would just take the modal ontological argument.
yeah, you could do that.
Whose model balancing is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can just deny S5.
No, I don't think you can.
Which premise
Why?
do you
That's just
deny?
like denying S5 is just like denying the language or something. It doesn't
Which
really
one
make
do
any
you
sense.
deny then, Vic?
Well, it's incoherent for God to exist, so it's not possible.
Gotcha. Wait, if it's impossible for God to exist, then like how could God be a person?
He's a person hyper intentionally.
Why can't you deny the?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Why can't you deny the?
I
why
guess you
can't
could just
do-
take like the view with like respect to like counterfactuals. It's just like a fixed,
Counterpossibles.
it's just like a right. I guess it would have to be a counterpossible.
Okay. Why can't you deny, like when I said deny S5, I mean, why can't you deny the axiom if something necessary is possible, then it's necessary.
Okay, fuck you guys for being interesting. I'm gonna go shower. See ya.
Okay.
Denying an axiom is just like denying the definition of a word. It doesn't really doesn't do anything.
Yeah, but you can't run the argument without that axiom, can you?
Well, I mean, you can't run an argument if you deny the definition of a word either, right? I mean, you just have to use a different word.
When you said the argument is incoherent, why isn't it incoherent? Let's see if you do the exact same thing that I did now.
Why is it incoherent?
Yeah.
Well, the first reason just that the possibility of a necessity, if that's just identical to the necessity of something, then there'd have to be a logical contradiction in God not existing. But there is no logical contradiction in God not existing. And so it's a contradiction for him to be necessarily existent. And that's taking God minus the necessity operator. It's like all the other properties of God.
Yeah, I see. You're saying that if it's possible for him to be necessary, then you get a contradiction from that.
Yeah, because that just means that he's necessary, right? And then necessity is operating over maximal excellence, right? So it's not over maximal greatness. Now, the maximal excellence, in order for that to be necessarily instantiated, there'd have to be a contradiction in maximal excellence failing to be instantiated. But there's no contradiction in that, in it failing to be instantiated, right? Therefore, it can't be necessarily instantiated because that's just all it means for it to be necessarily instantiated. If we're talking about logical necessity. But I guess they try to appeal to metaphysical necessity, but I think metaphysical necessity, if it's not conceptual necessity, is just an appeal to normative principle.
Right, because the argument would make it logically necessary, whereas they just want it to be in all possible worlds metaphysically.
Yeah, so then you just run the problem. There's a problem with you run the argument against metaphysical necessity, which I think is just it's like T-Rex necessity or something. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. But it's kind of just an appeal to normative principle, right? It's saying to say something is metaphysically necessary but not logically necessary. In virtue of what is it metaphysically necessary if it's not conceptually necessary? And they can really have no response to that, right? They'll just say, well, it is because it is or something. So it's just it's just, I don't know, it's like not really saying anything at all. It just becomes meaningless.
I see.
So I actually do think metaphysics is mostly garbage.
I would disagree.
You don't disagree?
Uh, I don't think all of it is, but a good deal of it is mental masturbation. But do you think
I think that's
causal?
why don't you think that's true for like multiverse then?
I don't think multiverse is metaphysics. I mean, when I say metaphysics, I think more of talking about things like, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for X? Can you have X? What counts as Y? But which do you think? Do you think the Gödel's argument is better than Plantinga's?
No, I think they're all the same.
Or do you think the best argument for God is
Design probably.
the teleological one?
Yeah, some version of it.
Yeah, I see. Was not the argument that turned at one atheist into a deist? Flynn or whatever his name was.
But yeah, that just seems like it's the most like intuitively plausible one. But I think that one's problematic too, obviously, right? Because of the falsification stuff.
What do you think? What do you think the flaw of the kalam is?
The kalam. I mean, both premises are questionable. One is just incoherent.
Which one is that?
That whatever begins to exist has a cause.
How is it incoherent?
Well, the way Craig formulates it is it requires a theory, but I think a theory is incoherent
I see.
because there have to be tensed facts. That's one. I mean, there's multiple other things with it, but
Also, the Bible supports B theory.
For God said, "Let there be a block of time."
Wait, you said the Bible supports it?
He's obviously joking, Mario. So are you?
I was just so confused for a second.
No, I
I thought
actually
you-
the Bible legitimately supports B theory of time.
What? Where? When? How?
One of the Bible verses is it's saying God is the beginning, the end, first and last, Alpha, Omega, which heavily implies B theory,
does it?
which actually works against the Kalam because the Kalam requires A theory.
I don't think you need any of that. I mean, you can just like on a theory of time, the past doesn't exist, right? But for there to be
I'm sorry, but you just cut out. I didn't hear a word you just said. Can you repeat?
said on a theory of time, the past doesn't exist, but things in the past cause things in the future or in the present. So you have to think that things are caused by non-existent things to be an atheist, which is just doesn't make any sense.
I would agree.
Well, you would want to be charitable and just grant a theory of time. You could still demolish the argument.
Yeah, but I mean, at that point, you can play Dungeons and Dragons forever, right? Like you can run an art, you can you can show some contradiction and then say, okay, well, what if that isn't actually a contradiction? Let's just presuppose it's not. Then show another one, right? And then you show another one. You're like, okay, well, let's just ignore that for a second. You can do that probably forever.
Yeah, but the more you do, the more you shrink the argument, the more you take it's like any force it has left until you completely choke it out.
Yeah.
Like you
But
can
then,
even like grant both premises, right, and just critique Craig's modification of Ghazali's argument of why the cause must be God.
that might be the strongest part of his argument, honestly.
I mean, even if that's the case, you could still like demolish that argument because the argument only has the force it has, which I assume you think it has, if you've already granted the impossibility of the actual infinite. But you can grant both premises without granting the impossibility of the actual infinite.
Yeah. But doesn't that just get you the second premise, right? That the universe began to exist.
No, I mean, you can grant Craig both of the premises without granting him that an actual infinite is impossible, and then seeing as an actual infinite is possible, he can't run Ghazali's argument very effectively.
Wait, no, but I thought the actual infinity thing was only to support the second premise that the universe.
Yeah, no, to support the second premise and to support Ghazali's argument.
Oh, really? How does it? What does it function?
Because once he says that the universe has a cause, he asks you what is the cause of the universe. Either it is a mechanical cause, that means a jointly set of necessary conditions, or it is an agent causation. But since the universe was had a temporal beginning, and its cause must have a temporal cannot be past infinite. Uh, because if the cause was past infinite, the universe has to be past infinite because a sufficient condition cannot be met without its effect being present, right? There can't be a delay in the effect.
So I thought the
But if
idea was that once you say the universe began to exist and the universe is temporal, then you think time began to exist.
right, but if the cause of the universe is um, if the cause of the universe is let's say non-agent and it's a set of necessary conditions that are jointly sufficient, then how could the cause be atemporal and the effect be temporal?
Well, no, I think that's another problem with atemporal causation. That's also incoherent.
Yeah, so what Craig says, it says that that is an impossibility, and so the cause has to be some kind of an agent causation.
Mhm. So I thought what he said is right. The cause has to be atemporal. It has to be non-physical, right? And it's immensely powerful, obviously, because it causes the universe. But since it's atemporal and non-physical, the only things that we know of that are non-physical are abstract objects and numbers. But abstract objects, sorry,
Oh, that's a
abstract
different
objects.
argument.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of, right? That it has to be
Oh,
either an
okay.
abstract object or a mind, right? And since abstract objects
That's
are,
a new that's a new argument. By new I mean like it started running like in the 1990s, I think. But the one originally in his 1939 book was the Ghazali's modification.
oh yeah, I didn't read any of his books.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I haven't read any book.
So the original one just went something along the lines of the universe was brought into being either by a mechanical operating set of necessary and sufficient. Never mind, he left.